first thing I want to say is, He is risen. And you respond back, He is risen indeed, right on. Before I get totally into everything this morning, this Easter Sunday morning, I want to just make an apology. Last night, our Easter Sunday sermon had major difficulties. I literally spent 9 or more hours trying to get things up and running and out to you guys. Just didn't work. Internet went down. Both sources had problems with my filming equipment. Please forgive me. But it did get up there. And if you want to go back and check out what the Lord brought to me for Easter Friday night, do so. You know, I've been thinking, although we can find time to lament at Easter, I'm not sure that we should, especially when it comes to our own personal situations. I think we should attempt to take a break from maybe some of the bad things that are happening in our lives, the grieving and feeling bad about our situations. I mean, unless you're really suffering and really destitute, and if that's the case, you need immediate help, and just to make it through the day, then I think really that you need to get a hold of a Jesus follower, let them know, and get them to help you out. I definitely believe this, that Easter time is not a time when I should feel sorry for myself, no matter what's going on in my life. Many people, when they hear me say that, might get angry and say, buddy, you don't know how bad I have it. And you're right, I don't know your issues. I don't know if you've got it bad or not, but put the fish club down for a second and just hear me out, okay? Take a seat, hear me out, just humor me for a bit. At the very least, use this time as a distraction to relieve you of your woes for a bit. And maybe, just maybe, you might not feel as downtrodden after hearing this. We have a deal? Right on. Easter Sunday, I want to tell you about what Jesus did just for you. And the reason I say it that way is because if you were the only person on earth, Jesus would have come, died, and redeemed you by his death and resurrection. And let me further say this. Jesus is so into you, was so desperate to have a relationship with you, that he did all of what I'm going to talk to you about this morning just to have that father-child relationship with you. So, sit back and listen. Our first scene is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, so Jesus knows it's almost time that he has to pay the price for the sins of the world. And he goes to pray. And as he goes to pray, he takes some disciples with him. And the stress is so great, knowing what's going to happen to him, that actually what happens is a medically explained condition called hematidrosis. Hematidrosis. Say that 10 times real quick. Hematidrosis. And it's defined in medical dictionaries as the excretion of blood or blood pigments in the sweat as a result of severe anxiety triggered by fear. So, Jesus goes into the garden, starts praying, asking the Father, says, do we really need to do this? But if we do, I am willing. It's your will first above mine. And he did this all for you. He knew what was coming. In Matthew 20:19 describes it. All the agony of being scourged, of torment on the cross, and worst of all, being forsaken by his Father. We find that in Matthew 27:46. Because of suffering this hematidrosis, the skin, the result that happens is that the skin becomes extremely tender and fragile, which have made Jesus' pending physical insults even more painful. His skin would have torn more easily once the flogging and the whipping had begun, leading him to more blood loss than normal if he was to be whipped. The thing that would have happened to Jesus, or that did happen to Jesus, is he received what you call a flogging. So there was a Roman whip, a torturous whip of a cat of 9 tails, they call it. And on the end of each little strand was either bone, glass, metal, or rock. Okay? And so what this did was basically stripped the dermis and the epidermis off. And so all the veins and musculature becomes exposed. The sinews, the bowels of the victim were end up exposed. and really it's designed to bring a person to about as close to death as can happen without actually doing the deed right there. In fact, history dictates in Roman executions that many people died at their flogging even before they were put up on a cross. That's how severe it was. Medical examiners have done theoretical, what I would say, evaluations of the crucifixion and especially the flogging. Some medical examiners even said that possibly, more than likely, parts of the spine would also become visible to the naked eye. The Romans were spectacularly cruel when it came to these things, because their idea was to make it so bad that nobody would do that kind of crime again, what they were suffering for here. And so whereas the Jews had a rule, what they called is 40 minus 1, so 40 lashes by a whip, and then minus 139, because they believed that 40 would kill the person. Whereas they had that, the Romans did not. And so they would just go on and on and on and on to the point was proven to those people around them. If you do this bad thing over here, then this is the result. This is what happens. This will be your payment. Theologians have guessed that Jesus' scourging was especially vicious in the fact that actually Pilate tries to have Jesus released sometime during the scourging. So he must have looked and he must have seen and gone, oh my goodness, this is really over. The next thing that happened was the crown of thorns and the robe they threw onto him. And this was unique to him because he had called himself king. And so they usually executions, they didn't put a crown of thorns and a robe. Their nakedness was a shame to them. And so they mocked Jesus this way and added too. Now, who out there knows that if you've ever had a cut on your scalp, it bleeds? Now, picture big, nasty, vicious thorns. I don't know how many. It must have been 100 or more, stabbing into his scalp. Add to this that his body is already bleeding profusely. And we know how much it bleeds up top here. He's already bleeding profusely. The blood is starting to clot. The blood on his back is clotting. He's wearing a robe. And who has ever put a Band-Aid on a fresh cut? And we know that the scab actually kind of heals into the Band-Aid. So when you peel it off, it adds to the pain and it starts the bleeding all over again. So we've got Jesus with a robe on. Everything's starting to clot. It's going into the robe and it's starting to clot up. And they rip the robe off him and pull, and all the nerves in his body and everything probably just jarred right there. And so even these small lacerations up here, they lead to a condition called hypovolemia, hypotension. And sometimes because of the bleeding that happens so much there, prolonged bleeding can lead to death. Jesus did this for you. What happens next is something that happened more inside that people wouldn't see. And because of these traumatic events, he would have went into shock. Okay? I know some people who've suffered a really good slice against the arm. They've gone into shock. In fact, just this morning, I witnessed a car accident in which when they brought them out, only the small gashes put them into shock. So imagine taking this many cuts and slashes and deep wounds and not going into shock. It's impossible. And so what that caused was an inflammation of the sac of Jesus' heart, which caused stabbing pains in his chest. So he's going through all of this. They're tearing things off him. They're stabbing things in him. They're striking. The Bible says they struck him with his hands. They spat on him. And now he's starting to have heart problems. He did all of this for you. Now, I think something that can't be overlooked is Jesus' journey up to Golgotha. And journey, wow, I think that's looking at the cup half full, isn't it? When we take a look at it, Roman historians are not quite sure about how much the cross weighed, but it was very heavy. It needed to support a man up in the air for long periods of time, and it needed to be used over and over, so it needed to be quite large in size. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have hopped it up big hills with wood strapped to your back, but even the most fittest people, I believe, will come up believing that's a bit of a challenge. And so now just imagine you have been beaten to a pulp, you've been bled out, slashed all over your body, you're suffering from shock, jeered at, spit at by the crowds, and now you're being forced to go up a dusty road in order to go to your own crucifixion. You're carrying a giant piece of wood on your back in order to get up the hill so they can finish the deed with a horrible execution. This is what Jesus did for you. When the average person watching this would have been crying, enough, enough, oh my gosh, enough. They do one of the thing associated with this torturous event more than any other thing, and that is the nails in the hands and the feet. The feet, what happens is they throw the cross on the ground. It's jagged, it's nasty. If you see me at church, I have a wooden cross. It's banged up. There's a little bit of blood on there. Not real blood, but red paint. And it's represented to, it's meant to represent the real cross. I'm not into the shiny crosses. I'll be honest with you guys. There's nothing glorious about the cross. It was a vicious event, and the jaggedness of the cross reminds me of what Jesus went through. But nonetheless, they lie him down. They get big, jagged spikes. They double the feet up over top of each other because they had to get both feet on in between that beam. And they start hammering right at the very base of the leg and where the foot is met, and through one and through the other. And you know what? It took a number of swings to get those nails through. Can you imagine the agony? It wasn't just one bang, one staple into there. Big, nasty, jagged spike, bang, 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 and then it hits the wood, bang, 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 some more. Can you imagine the agony? Then they straighten him out because his body was obviously convulsing, so they have to straighten him out and get a soldier on each arm. And right here, they bang in between where the arm meets and the hand is. And again, bang, bang through the flesh. And then into the wood. Bang, 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 bang. And then the other hand, at the base of the hand where there is, over there, when he's already convulsing, he's going into shock and a number of other horrible things. He's bleeding. The jagged splinters are jabbing into the back of his back where his spine is. Bang, bang, bang. Now we're through the flesh. Bang, bang, bang. Onto the wood, through the wood. And he did this all for you. What you're probably thinking at this point, you're thinking this is gruesome. It's so different. When we were in Europe, we went through some of the major museums and they picture Jesus, and it's almost, to be honest with you, it's almost pathetic. He's very clean. He's up there. He's got a tiny little tack in this one, a tiny little tack there, a little nick in the side where there's some blood where the spear went. There, he's got a little tiny tack in his things, and he's got this look, and he's it's horrific to present such a sacrifice in that way, isn't it? I went around shaking my head. Nonetheless, when you think that's been enough for poor Jesus, all of a sudden you realize that as they have him up on the cross, they drop the cross in the hole. It jars every bone in his body, jars every bone. Who else knows that when you sit in a prolonged position like this, it's hard to breathe. You actually have to push yourself up to breathe. And so for the next time, they say the crucifixion took him between 3 and 6 hours. For the next bit, Jesus starts to suffocate. And strength is lost, and he has to keep pushing up just to get a breath. He gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And remember, the Bible said he was offered pain medication, a mix of gall and wine, and he chose not to have it because he needed to suffer for us, for you. He did this for you. The Bible says that Jesus passed. He expired. He died. Not soon after. And just to make sure, usually they're dead. Usually what they did was they broke their legs. But in this case, there was actually a prophecy that none of his bones would be broken. And what happened next was they took a spear and they jammed it in here. And it went up into the sac of the heart. This has been unbelievable when you look at what a medical examiner said happened to. It's a common known fact. These were executions. To Jesus was especially bad because he had said he was the king, and they added all the things like the crown of thorns and the robe. But you know something else, like I said, they didn't see what was going on with his heart. But there's another portion of Jesus that suffered even more. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? It's hard to believe. Even more than his physical suffering. And you know what that was? That was the fact that as he sat on that cross, as he was nailed up there, that jagged piece of wood, he agreed with the Father, with the Holy Spirit, to take on the sins of the world. And so at that moment, the Father pulled himself, turned his back on him, and allowed all the sin of the world that ever was and would have ever come to be to land on him. So as he's suffering physically, a terrible, most excruciating death, Jesus is agonizing inside with sin that's been dropped on him. He's paying the price spiritually, emotionally, everything. So you have Jesus absolutely going through the worst physical possible thing that could happen to a person. And now they put the sin, the evil, the grime, the terrible stuff that we don't like to talk about. They put it, all the things that we've said and done in the past that we don't want people to know, the skeletons in our closet. They take all of that and they throw it on him. They throw it on him. And he did this for us. Did this for you. When I think about this, folks, my problems don't seem so much anymore. My moaning and groaning seems superfluous or something that shouldn't be. When I say, does he even love me? How can I even say that when I look at this, what he did for me, what he did for you? It causes me to walk back and say, okay. And to look at my life and to say, first of all, he is worthy. He is worthy. And second of all, I owe him my all. Not just a little bit, not just Sunday, not just a ministry, not just a side salad. I owe him my all. He needs to be the focus of my life. And all the rest of the stuff, he'll take care of. But I'm encouraging you right now to look at Jesus, to see what he did for you, and to realize he did that for you so that the relationship between you and him is not a distant, at hand's length relationship, but it's a close child, Abba, which means daddy in Hebrew. Abba, Father relationship. Why else would he willingly go through such pain, such agony? And so as you celebrate what Jesus has done for you and his victory by rising from the grave, conquering death, being seen by multiple witnesses, I want you to consider Jesus and his worthiness to be your life focus, wherever you are, whatever your situation. whatever's going on. And now I wish you peace. I wish you a relationship with the risen Christ. And I wish you to go and serve the Lord. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.